And I can find a television documentary on the history of Earth, such as I've been watching recently, as awe-inspiring as any of the magnificent images and stories that previously I encountered in the Buddhist tradition. It speaks to me just as much of the essential transitory nature of things, of the conditioned nature of things, of the ultimate nature of things. So I'd like to say something about imagination. It's a really important faculty to cultivate and to bring alive in the journey to awakening. And in a sense, the first thing that may be said is that imagination is alive in us all the time. We're constantly imagining. This world, right now, is imagined. Right now, I'm imagining this world, that I'm sitting here. I have no sense experience at all, apart from a tiny bit of pressure from what is back there. And yet I imagine that I'm sitting in a room with four corners. And I know that I'm sitting in a room with four corners, although I'm not currently experiencing quite a chunk of it. So there's only a very, very thin stream of data that is describing our present moment experience, and the rest of it is imagined. So the imagination is a constant in human experience. We're always imagining, always, always, always. We're never not imagining. But there are other ways of describing the imagination, talking about the imagination, which go well beyond this imagined present moment. And that involves a kind of symbolic imagination. The myths, the stories, the images that will often come with different religious traditions. These are fascinating. In the human mind, we reach out to try to understand what is meant by something. What is meant by compassion? What is the meaning of compassion? What is absolute compassion? And in some traditions, we maybe form the image of, say, the Virgin Mary clad in blue. Interestingly, she's never a young Jewish woman. But yes, there's this extraordinary blonde, blue-eyed, blue-clothed figure which stands as somehow the embodiment of compassion. In some of the Buddhist traditions, you might form the image of Chenrezig or Avalokiteshvara or Kuan Yin, Tara, male or female embodiments of compassion. Medieval princesses or princes very often, interestingly, that they're dressed in feudal, medieval clothing and get fixed in this particular, the time at which they emerged. So these figures and their stories and the myths behind them somehow stand for and illustrate and engage people in a visceral response to the idea of compassion. So I engaged with many of these traditional images for a long time, very wholeheartedly, devotionally. They made a big difference to me at the time. They were really effective. It was an important part of my journey to awakening. Lately, though, in the last perhaps decade or so, there's been a bit of a change, and I found myself turning more to nature, to contemporary art and traditional art, Western art, to beauty, to science, for my inspiration and sense of awe and wonder and magnificence. And I find that just as valid. So it's almost as if over time I've come to discover my own spiritual temperament. That my own spiritual temperament is more, in a sense, naturalistic and less symbolic. I'm less drawn to the traditional symbolic imagery and much more inspired by the natural world. Much more inspired by the natural world these days. And I find the sense of awe and wonder of the potential for transformation in the network of life. the web of life in itself, for me, is a constant source of awe. And wherever I look in the natural world, and whatever I read in the sciences, and when I see beauty, I'm somehow drawn into a space of connectedness. I'm drawn into a space where my sense of a self dissolves to some extent. There's just life going on. Just life going on. And I can find a television documentary on the history of Earth, such as I've been watching recently, as awe-inspiring as any of the magnificent images and stories that previously I encountered in the Buddhist tradition. It speaks to me just as much of the essential transitory nature of things, of the conditioned nature of things, of the ultimate nature of things. So it's not that science as such, with its laws, ideas, and theories, is what appeals to me. More the sense that these are descriptive of an ever-changing web of life, which is infinitely deep, infinitely broad, infinitely high, infinite in all directions. As much as any of the traditional iconography does for me. It's just a case of a way of seeing, a way of being, and a way of appreciating. But a piece of this is recognizing as well that my engagement with, say, science and the natural world is as much an imagined engagement as my engagement with traditional iconography was. That, yes, takes place in somewhere the spiritual imagination, one might say. But my sense of the web of life is similarly imagined. It's not something that I'm actually looking and seeing all these filaments of connection in some strangely realistic sort of way. No, that's all happening in the imagination. That trees are breathing right now and keeping the planet alive, that's not something that I observe when I walk amongst the trees. It's something I know and feel and sense in my imagination. That there are these fungal networks underground. That's something that I imagine as I walk in a forest. It's not something that I'm actually observing. So one's connection with the web of life is an imagined connection, just as much as the aspects of the traditional spiritual imagination are imagined. And both imaginations are seeking to point out the same fundamental truth, which is that it's all transient. It's all ultimately empty. There's no fixed and independent self at the heart of things. It's all change, it's all flux, it's all magnificent.